right, got my camera in position. And today I'm going to be doing Witch King versus Eowyn on board. I'm just going to be doing a comprehensive sketch if I can get my camera to work. Let me see if I can. Let's rotate it this way. That's more like it. And that'll have to be as good as it gets for now. Let me grab a pencil. And let me grab a needed eraser. And I'm actually going to cut this. Move that down. Switch this off for a moment. And just want to make sure that people can still see my live stream. Oh, look at, there's 8 people in the chat. No pressure. Yeah, so today I'm going to be doing Witch King versus Eowyn comprehensive sketch. I can't see the chat, but I'll occasionally look up and try to see if anybody's written anything. So I just want to move this over, have my reference in front of me on my computer here. And let's get this show on the road, shall we? So basically I have an 11 by 17. I'm going to be blowing this up to 18 by 24. And to kind of mimic more closely the aspect ratio of the larger piece, I'm just cutting my edges in, my drawable area in a bit with this really old school plywood ruler that I have here. And I'm just going to go in. And that's pretty good. Pretty good. Let me just check the camera. Hi everybody. Welcome. Yeah, just as an aside, you know, fantasy art's a big interest of mine, but I also sort of dabble in paleo art, or paleo fantasy rather. This isn't exactly an accurate T-Rex. Maybe 20 years ago it would have been, but I had fun with it, you know, playing around with gouache and watercolor, getting the feathers on there and trying to make the plumage look really bright and colorful. But that's kind of the kick I'm on lately. But when I'm not doing dinosaurs attacking people, I'm drawing Lord of the Rings mainly. So first things first, I want to set up a dynamic composition. I'm going to have the Witch King over here, and I'm going to have the sort of winged beast. And when I start this, I generally just start with a few simple forms, you know, trying to get the sort of snout of the winged beast. And I go in light and loose, because I don't want to have to throw in tons of detail and then erase. There we go. And that's going to take me into sort of Eowyn, sort of over here, and I'm doing a very sort of dynamic, again, dynamic pose. And usually if a line cuts one way, you want to cut it the other way. So typically you'll get something cut one way, cut the other way, cut the other way. So boom, 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 right? You want to sort of balance out those gesture lines. And I have photo reference that I'm working off of. I scoured the internet for photo reference. I find it very difficult to kind of come up with or really find good photo reference in this day and age, 2025, just because there's so much, machine generated stuff on there, and I really like basing my photo reference off models. But there's less and less sort of actual physical cosplay you can find for characters on the internet. I tried looking up some images from the actual movie, and I have a few that I'm kind of referencing because it is loosely sort of based off the Peter Jackson films. Those films are pretty popular, so if I'm doing like an artwork and, I want to move an original piece, I try and tie it to something that's in the popular zeitgeist, right? And I like those movies too, so it's not like I'm just sort of, homaging or off those movies because anything, with that IP on it sells well. It's also because I'm a genuine lover of those movies, and I read the books before the movies came out, and I have to say that I read them right before the movies came out in like the early 2000s, and I have to say that like they were pretty on model to what I pictured the characters looking like in the book for the most part. I mean, but yeah, again, I can't see the chat just because I have like the ring light attachment above me there, but I'll try to occasionally look up, and if we have any LOTR purists in the group, you can tell me if Awen's inaccurate or not. I'm really trying to lean into this sort of I'm trying to like take a page out of Frazetta and really just make the characters, for the purposes of this like sort of underdrawing, make them as fluid as possible. I tend to struggle with stiffness, so I'm trying not to be as stiff. Then I'm doing a lot of what we call contour drawing, where I draw through the shape. To try to get, an accurate rendition of the shapes that make up the figure and retain that fluidity at the same time by not over-rendering but focusing on the big broad shapes. Really lots of fun. And trying to find like a pose, trying to find like a picture of Awen where you're getting enough of her face turning away in this angle, like any kind of, whether it's a model or cosplay, again, it's exceedingly difficult. I went on Bing, I went on, Google, like the whole nine, right? Like, I almost, for this particular piece, was tempted to like put out an ad for a model and do it the old school way, like they would have back in yesteryear. But it's a lot of money to hire a figure model. You can see how, again, I'm just kind of, I'm also inventing a bit here. You want to get that perspective right for the ear. And I'm not stressing it too much. It's a weird skewed side profile that I gave her, and part of that was intentional. I like that a lot so far, which is unusual. Usually at this stage of the game, I'm not a big fan of what I'm doing. Let me see, where did I throw that arm in the reference? Threw that right there. Yeah, and if anybody tells you they don't use reference, You know, like Frazetta, I love Frazetta. With that being said, you know, he claims he never used reference. I feel like if you kind of study him, and I have his Taschen book, it's clear the guy definitely used reference. I mean, I do think that he had a preternatural ability to uh, draw dynamic figures and kind of had like this a knack for pattern recognition, but I don't think he quite had like an didactic. He had an eye for how the camera moved, but I don't know if he had an didactic memory. Like some people can definitely draw without reference. I think Kim Jong-gi comes to mind. The late Kim Jong-gi. He was a fantastic artist. He was one of those guys who didn't really need photo reference, and he did have an didactic memory, admittedly. I'm nowhere near his level in terms of his ability to, you know, recognize bold, big shapes. I feel like with Kim Jong-gi, though, too, it depends on what format the artist works in, whether their work kind of resonates, right? Because I feel like for Kim Jong-gi, I feel like his work really served the viewer best when viewed on a scale of like feet. So like 20 by 50 feet, right? These huge tableaus that he would draw, and like he would draw on a car, he'd draw on a building wall, right? But when you shrink his art down, I did feel like some of the impact of his art got a little lost. And same thing like a Jim Lee. You think like a Jim Lee would be awesome viewed big, but I feel like Jim Lee is a comics artist, someone whose work is probably best viewed small format. So I think the format really dictates, you know, how the artist is received and how much of pop that artist's work has. I mean, for me personally, I don't really draw too big, but I do like the ability to kind of go 18 by 24 and blow out the, you know, the amount of canvas that I'm using. I kind of like that. All right, let's scoot over to the Witch King here. I'm kind of neglecting this area. When I like lay in a mannequin form for a figure, I don't want to go any more detailed than this. I want to kind of lay in the mannequin forms for all my elements of a piece first, and then after I've developed the mannequin form, and then I go in and then I'll go in and I'll actually, at that point, at the very end, the last like third of the drawing, start to do details. So what I'm doing here is I have the Witch King with his sort of arm raised, and he's got like a sword that sword that he points up at the sky. Let's see. Thanks everybody for bearing with me as I adjusted my camera. I love the look of the Witch King in this movie, in the movies, and I am kind of cribbing off the movies for this part of the drawing here. I'm sort of deviating a little bit here and there from the movie, but I really, for this piece, to be transparent, I am kind of homaging those movies. Just, I feel like the movies did such a great job. I'm getting too hung up in the details of the mask. I'm going to shrink that down. Let me try and throw in a placeholder for the shoulder here. He might be a little too big for the winged beast here, so I'm going to actually take his shoulder in a bit. And if I find that I make a form too big, I don't erase. At this stage, I try to like just let the marks ride and draw through my figures and just course correct on the fly that way. I find it retains that way you retain the fluidity and energy of the drawing, right? I'm also on Instagram at jamesbealcreations.com. You can follow me on there. This playmat will be available hopefully for Terrificon this year and for GraniteCon, although jury's out on GraniteCon. That's coming up kind of quick. GraniteCon is a convention in New Hampshire, sort of one of the premier, local comic conventions. Terrificon is probably the biggest show I'm doing this year. I was talking with some lovely folks over at DragonCon, but I kind of held off submitting to get in a table at DragonCon this year because I felt like I needed to sort of like expand out a little more slowly from where I am up in Vermont, and also make sure I had enough of a body of work there and I was diversified enough where I could really maximize sales while competing with some, competing for eyeballs with some of the bigger names that might be at that show, right? Because that's always the rub. If you're someone like me, like no one knows who I am really from Adam. Um, the challenge in that case becomes, and I'm just thinking a minute how I want to indicate if there's a gust of wind kind of blowing her hair that way, that means that there would be sort of, he would mainly have like a, maybe like a Batman style cape. Or not. I don't know. I'm playing around right now. I have like I said, I have a sort of computer done thumbnail reference sort of photo collage in front of me that I've used with all real life, either stills from the movie or real life cosplayers. I don't do the computer generated thing. I just, to be honest, it's not even an ethical thing. It's more of a, it doesn't look good thing. Or if you're trying to do a facsimile of a facsimile, it almost never works out well, right? And that's not to say I don't have ethical issues with certain applications of it, but that's not really the conversation here. It's more, again, just like if you're trying to draw like a figure, you're better off just getting a picture of a real person or drawing it from life, frankly. I'm going to zoom in on this so I can kind of see this more clearly. So I'm going to have to try to, there we go. Taking a page out of McFarlane. I'm trying to make the cape almost like part of the character. And it's funny, even though I'm doing a realistic or semi, I'm doing more of a painting in the vein of imaginative realism. I think there's still a lot that you can learn from studying comic artists when you're doing, especially if it's imaginative realism, trying to really accentuate or exaggerate a pose. you know. And I have like a triangle kind of going this way, and then I'm going to have a triangle kind of coming down here. So I'm not really cutting the page in half, right? I've got sort of a third here, I've got sort of a triangle here, and a triangle here, roughly. I did a Witch King Awen piece a few years back, and it was a small format one, kind of, relatively similar, but a little bit simpler than what I'm attempting now. And it sold at one of the Ren fairs. I do the Vermont Ren Fair every year, and that was good fun. Let me like move this over because I'm not seeing the back of this guy. I remember the Nazgul being kind of awkward. I remember it being very awkward to draw. Just because there's like, he has got a weird silhouette. It almost looks like he's a blanket. It almost looks like he has the same silhouette as a little kid who used, you know, if you, when you were a kid, you dress up as a ghost, you just put a blanket over your head. He's got that kind of funky silhouette, and I might just kind of bend the laws of physics here and sort of nix this like cape that I was trying to draw. Just because I feel like at this end the figure needs to be balanced out. And he's got his hand up there. Now I can kind of hone in on his mask a little. Let me just pivot up here and see the chat, see how many, if we have anybody left in here, and we don't. Everybody kind of left, but that's okay. I'm gonna just stick around. I'll make sure that we have a clear view of what's going on. And that's always the rub, right? When you do one of these live streams, you can end up talking to yourself, but that's okay. And I do appreciate the people tuning in, though. That was nice. Even if you tune in for 2 seconds, it's definitely, it's sweet, sweet nectar for me. It's motivation. And you want to do these comprehensive sketches because, you know, just having the photo pastiche reference, it helps for sure. But again, unless you're like Frank Frazetta or Kim Jong-ji, you're going to need more than that to pull off an effective drawing. I'm going to zoom in on this Witch King's crown here. He's got that crazy crown. It's really gnarly. I love it. And again, I'm just doing the comprehensive tonight. I'm not doing a start to finish oil painting. I'd love to do a live stream of the oil painting process, but that's something I have to kind of consider a little bit more thoughtfully before I dive into that, because it's, you know, oil painting is not, at least for me, it's not a quick process, and certain sections of it can be a little boring, to be honest. If you're just sitting there and watching me sort of mush an edge around for 2 hours, I don't know. I'm sure there's people who would be into that, but you know, I'm not exactly sure how many, right? I don't even know if this is symmetrical or not because I haven't flipped this in the mirror yet. And yes, I still, even after all these years of drawing, will still sort of flip pieces in the mirror. I think it's a great sort of way to kind of check your symmetry, do the mirror test as they call it. Flip your piece on your phone or in the mirror. And go from there. But I'm glad people liked my live stream too. All the likes help. There we go. Let me just check and make sure this looks okay in the camera. Kind of like that. And like I said, this isn't the first time that I've done the Nazgul. Let me zoom down. This is just the comprehensive. So basically, keeping it very kind of impressionistic. That's looking pretty good. Let me just make sure that's looking good in the top. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Yeah, just coming in. Making some adjustments here as I knock the camera with the brim of my hat. And the sword, I kind of want to have getting powered up by like lightning or something. I mean, like it's going to be like just like he's siphoning energy, and then I'm going to have the sun coming over this way, you know, to kind of highlight, you know, that Awen is the good guy, so to speak, good gal, and the Witch King, our friend, the Nazgul, Mr. Sunshine here is the bad guy. And you know, hopefully, you know, whenever you do these comprehensives right, you know, the figure is never. It's not about getting the figure 100%, you know, perfect or the way you want it. It's kind of capturing the general sense of dynamics and the feel and the gesture, like here, and then like getting things like the foreshortening correctly, you know, sort of laid in there. Here, I mean, I could have him swinging his mallet, but I'm going to have him holding like the reins of the stirrups of this fell beast here, and I'm going to have this guy kind of with his, you know, mouth open. I can start to hint at the mouth being open. I kind of invented a lot of this over here. I invented the hand, to be honest. The hand, there is no pose in the movie where he's actually doing this with his hand. In you know, so it's sort of just like, there's that one scene where he's confronting Gandalf where he does that. But other than that, that's it. But it is a kind of an awesome shot from below of him doing that with the sword, and definitely sort of, it helps indicate what it would actually look like if someone was holding a sword. I could have this dip lower, right? And again, you want to be using either reference from life, models, or you want to be doing photo reference. If you're doing like an oil painting, you don't want to just be winging it. Again, unless you're Frank Frazetta, then by all means. Or James Gurney or someone, yeah, then wing it. But even James Gurney will tell you straight up, he's pretty meticulous. He, at least in his early career, when he was working for National Geographic, he meticulously referenced things. Even still, pretty sure he's still probably referencing things. So he's got like, you know, you want to do the moment right before impact or something. So we're getting Awen right before she's about to like lunge, right? She's crouching and she's going to spring. We have the Witch King who's like powering up, and what I might do is actually try to like refine how I just laid this in. I kind of slipped into comic book artist mode for a minute, and I just kind of did some Kirby Crackle type scribbles, but really if we're trying to be, you know, which is fine, it's dynamic, I love that stuff. Also want to try to like, you know, think about would lightning actually move in that way, or would it be kind of more, a little more understated. I don't know. And then again, this is going to be on, this will be an original, but it'll also be on a few other products when it's done. And because I am a lefty, I'm sort of working my way this way. just did there. All I know is Awen has her shield down here. This thing should be a little closer. And there's going to be like haze and mist coming up, so the bottom of the fell beast here is going to be sort of obscured. I don't like the wing up there. And in the reference, the wing up isn't up high. It's kind of flapped down. I just want to make sure that when I do this, there isn't a lot of sort of unused or wasted space in this area. So I might extend sort of the backdrop of the mountains, Mountain Mindolin and Minas Tirith out a little bit. I could have a wing coming into the foreground like that. Right, and then we still have Aowen. I've extended this arm, pushed it out quite a bit from where it is. In the original drawing, or in the original photo, whatever you want to call it. He's got these weird spikes that come off him. There we go. And here I'm going to have quite a bit of fun drawing this monster. And again, this is a comprehensive sketch. So it doesn't need to be like the Mona Lisa or anything. It just needs to get the point across. We have the reins sort of getting whipped around. Kind of like that. And just the general look of the Mordor armor, I really kind of jive with. Like the sort of Morgul armor that the creature's sporting, like the headpiece or whatever. I always thought that was cool in the original movie. And for this, I am kind of, again, for certain parts of this, I'm definitely significantly referencing the original film. I want to try to do more long form YouTube content, but I just haven't. Finding the time is tough, especially with, if you have a channel that's of a small size, the incentive isn't exactly, frankly, that strong to do that much long form stuff. But I do want to kind of get out there and share more, and because the only way to kind of build that incentive, build that audience, is to actually just do more long form stuff and try to share what you're doing with people. So try to do that. I love the shorts though, to be honest. I have good fun doing YouTube shorts. I feel like for any artist, shorts is a low barrier to entry for the platform, and it's a great way to kind of get out there, because I think the discoverability on shorts is it's fairly high compared to the discoverability and more conventional long form content. But I think with the algorithm always changing, my guess is that they like you to do a mix of both. YouTube, YouTube being they. Yeah, I'm just kind of making some of this up because these are all, a lot of the armor in the film, at least like for some of the scenes, is computer rendered, so it gets a little jumbly in terms of trying to really decipher, okay, what shape is what shape went where. And I could like actually eliminate like a lot of this gobbledygook here. And just kind of focus on being a little more true to the silhouette of the actual character. But I don't want to lose too much of that, too much of the crazy cape, right? Because I feel like this does add something to fills the space, giving him more of a gnarly cape than he actually has in the film. Even if the wind's blowing this way for him and that way for her, and it's not really following physics, no one really is going to question that if you're on your game with selling the scene. Like, the viewer will just, well, they won't even notice it. They'll buy it. It'll look more weird if you kind of try to stress about that stuff. In my opinion, for what it's worth. . That's the ticket. That is the ticket. I like that. Let me see. Oh, my wife said, this is amazing. Thank you, wife. I just outed her. But that's okay. I don't know where everybody's from. Feel free to write where you're from in the chat. I'm not looking at the chat that much. The chat is actually above where I can see. The camera is sort of, the camera's up here, my face is down here. So the camera, if I did this, I'll just do this real quick, right? You can see how much below the camera I am, so I can't see the chat, right? But you feel free to, you know, write in the chat where you're from, and I'll poke up there and look up in a minute. The reason I'm doing this is because for something like this, where you're kind of inventing the pose that doesn't exist, and it's easier to kind of do a pencil comprehensive and pair that with a sort of photo collage reference, and then between the two of those, you're able to have enough of a roadmap when you're actually doing the underdrawing. I mean, finished painting on panel. I'm going to be doing an 18 by 24 oil painting on panel, and I actually think it'll go a little bit quicker than the last piece I did. I did a Star Wars piece, and the thing with Star Wars is like sort of architecture and the technology is so time consuming to paint and oil because there's a lot of hard edges, and then you're also dealing with like old pictures of very recognizable celebrities, whereas, you know, with Witch King versus Eowyn, particularly Eowyn, you can use the Miranda Otto likeness, the actress, or Miranda Otto if you like, but you can also kind of find plenty of wonderful cosplay images that will work as well. And I don't mind sort of doing the latter for this particular scene, even though that's not to take anything away from the original actress's performance, but there are not many images of her. There's a lot of fantastic production photos of her in the costume from the front, but you really want to have good reference for this stuff, and like I couldn't find any real good reference of Miranda Otto sort of brandishing her weapon, you know, from an over-the-shoulder view. But there are shots of, you know, again, female cosplayers that kind of have that Valkyrie look to them that, you know, you can go in there. I love this little hook thing that, you know, I'll tell you, they did a great job with these fell beasts. They really did. And yeah, this is not a quick process. As you can see, I'm kind of going in and I'm just sort of trying to keep it light and loose, trying not to get too stiff, which is again my problem. I struggle with to this day is if I'm not careful, the figure can really the whole painting can really stiffen up, and when that happens, it's the kiss of death for any dynamic image. I always tell my students, do not let the image stiffen up. It's better to be wrong or have wonky anatomy than it is to have a stiff, lifeless image. He's got these weird fins. I might just give him some extra or maybe Maybe not. Maybe we'll just keep it like that. I hope I didn't make him too big for the scale of the monster. Now that I'm looking at this, I wanted to make him a big dude, right? Because he's supposed to be like 10 feet tall, but I wanted to make it not so big that this thing looks like it would be a struggle for it to fly him with it on its back. That's the other danger. Whenever you're drawing people on horseback in particular, getting the scale of the horse can be challenging if you don't do a lot of horses. I think I've done enough. I can kind of get it now, but I'm just cribbing off this thing. And you see my underdrawing will serve as a roadmap, so that I don't need to kind of do a lot of thinking when I throw in certain details. I can just kind of throw them in there, and I'm good to go, essentially. I'm deviating slightly here and there from Peter Jackson's original, designs here, or not his designs, but John Lee, or Alan Lee rather, John Howe. I'm getting their names confused. I'm not doing the exact one-to-one, right, of their versions of these creatures or characters for that matter, but I'm keeping it very close, to be honest, because I feel like they do such a fantastic job. They did just a fantastic job just getting them right the first time. It's tough to really, you can, and I think a good example of doing on-model characters that don't line up with the movie versions, if you look at the Magic of the Gathering sets, I think, overall they did a wonderful job with the card artwork for those sets. And those characters are definitely not sort of on model with the Peter Jackson movies. But for me, that aesthetic that Jackson kind of let John Howe and Alan Lee in particular come up with. And also, I would throw Ted Naismith in there. I think he probably was in the background, maybe he didn't contribute directly to the movies, but I feel like Alan Lee and John Howe were definitely sort of, aware of Naismith's work and incorporated some of that into their thought process when they were designing the look for the films. I can't imagine that they wouldn't. I'm going to give this guy a tongue. And I am going to cut this off in another 10 minutes or so. But I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a sort of preview of inside look at the process here, what goes into doing one of these playmats that I produce. If you're curious, my playmats are for sale at www.jamesbealcreations.com, and I have a Shire Hobbiton playmat up there and a Rivendell playmat, as well as some other draconic playmats. I have an Eastern Dragon, a sort of Native American warrior riding an ice dragon. I have I have a Fairy Tale Forest series, and the first one of that is done, so that's like sort of an Ent in an enchanted forest, and there's a fairy featuring prominently, outside of a little mushroom house. It's a little more on the whimsical side of things compared to like a piece of this nature, but it's all good fun, and I love mushroom houses and hobbit holes. I think that there is definitely like sort of crossover there, right, between some of the whimsical stuff I do and some of the more epic or even dark fantasy stuff I do. Um, I can start to lay in more value if I want, with the understanding that, like, you know, we're actually not seeing too much of his eye. Oh, and they have these awesome little spikes that hang down. Definitely want to get those in. Again, haven't checked the symmetry on this. Could be really bad. It could be completely off. So, you know, have a heart. Don't dog me on the symmetry until I've had until after the live stream and I've had a chance to kind of check it in the mirror, right? Buonissimo, ottimo lavoro. Facciare queste cose ormai. It's Italian. Basically, at this point, good job getting this section. I'm trying to get better at my Italian. I'm almost B1, self-taught, but B1's tough. It's tough to really get there without. I mean, I have to take the exam to really be sure, but at some point I'll take that exam. I kind of like that. I see. Oh, we have 2 people in the chats. 2, due persone in the chat. 2 persone. Sono in chat. I'm linking shadows. Something else that you can kind of do is like link all of your darks together. And I think that, you know, doing that sort of really makes a difference when you're trying to not only like make form look dynamic, but sort of almost like develop a shorthand for form, right? Like all this kind of tightens up, right? And I don't have to sit there and sort of think about, oh, what's going on in here? Just throw shadow in there, but make sure the shadows kind of line up with your lighting scheme, right? That's the secret to that stuff. And then, you know, I know the sun's going to be over here. I know that if he's coming this way, this area is going to be, this trunk is going to be backlit, which means I can throw shadow over here, right? So these are things you want to kind of think about. Again, it doesn't have to be the Mona Lisa here. Like we're not going for that. He's got some crazy kind of like, what does he have? He's got like, he's got like a discoloration on his skin, but I think that's more or less because I forgot to sort of pick that up in Photoshop when I was comping up the photo reference. Because I played up the green in Photoshop on this trunk. Because in the movie, the trunk looks really washed out. And that's the problem with a lot of the Lord of the Rings movies is it looks beautiful in motion, but the stills lose a bit of their punch because the colors are quite desaturated actually, more on the muddy gray side. But for a painting, you really don't necessarily, you want to mix muddy and paint muddy, but you want the colors to kind of actually play off a few vibrant hues in the piece. In my opinion, you want to incorporate some saturated color, and you don't find that as much in photo stills from, especially movies after 2000. Um, Retro movies, like you find it more like looking at any old James Cameron movie, you'll find the color sort of grading in that movies, like in those movies, like the original Terminator 1 and 2, much more sort of pop and high contrast in those movies, which is nice. I'm gonna get rid of this lightning for now because I could always paint that in later, but I definitely don't need it. It's not necessary, right? Until I get to the actual painting portion, because I think like lightning is also one of those things where like once I start laying the paint in, it'll become a little bit more clear. And I also want to make sure that this looks dynamic without relying on those things for as a crutch. I could flip the hand back even more, but I don't mind that. I kind of like that. I mean, I could have sort of a little bit more of a cape going that way, right? Like a bat. Like I think I did that in the old one too. Let's focus over here. Always trust the process. Yes. Do I trust the process? That's a good question. Do I trust the process? I think like we all sort of are our own worst critics, right? So to answer your question, generally speaking, I do trust the process. But like many artists, and you could talk to any artist, you could talk to Dave Finch, particularly Dave Finch. If you watch David Finch's channel, he's an excellent YouTube channel. You can see where he's kind of like, in his head, he's kind of like, I don't know about this. Even though it looks fantastic to us, he's second guessing himself the entire time. Not the entire time, that's not fair. But I feel like he definitely, what's the word? He's definitely sort of self-critical in a way, and not in an unhealthy way, but like definitely, in a sober way where you wouldn't necessarily think an artist that has his command of shape and form would be. And I think for me, it comes down to, I know if a painting is hitting, right? We all know if a painting is like clicking on all four cylinders, right? I've had that happen. I did a sort of Hollow Earth painting where I had a guy who's fighting multiple velociraptors, and the scientific accuracy of my velociraptors in that piece was sort of suspect, but they looked cool, right? That's all I cared about, really. I was trying to be scientifically accurate within reason, right? But that piece, for whatever reason, clicked very smooth. And I did another piece right before that. It was a guy finding a dragon egg in a cave with a dragon behind him, like roaring and fire coming out of its mouth. And this dragon was guiding this adventurer to this egg that it was protecting. And that piece came out fantastic as well, in a way that it was just a smooth process. And then I've had other pieces, particularly this year. I'll be honest, this year I've struggled with a lot of being able to call pieces done, more so this year than last year. I think for whatever reason this year, I've been more experimental, but I've also been a little bit more sort of, I don't know, is this going to hit when it's done? Kind of, and I think it's healthy to kind of go through that without it. The trick is, though, if you find yourself thinking that way, where you are second guessing yourself, it's okay, but you want to just not let the work become too precious to you. You want to just, have the sort of discipline to see a piece through to completion, even if you have to step away and come back, and learn from each piece you do. So that's sort of how I try to approach it. For this piece, yeah, I generally trust the process. I'm also kind of joking. I'm being a little facetious when I say I don't know about this. I kind of do know about this. I think the main thing is going to be when I blow this up. If I do have issues, it's not going to be with Aowen. If I have issues, it'll be sort of translating the Nazgul, that pose. Yeah, that's a good question though. I think like with young people too, I feel like I'm not super old or anything. I'm 43. I'm definitely not young, right? I'm not super young either, right? So I think like for me, when I see some of my students who are like in their 20s and they get really in their head, I kind of look and see how I was at that age. And the thing is though, some of these kids now coming out are so talented. Like I saw this video of this guy who whatchamacallit, he was this little kid, he was like 11 years old or whatever, and he went up to Jim Lee at a Comic-Con. And I'm thinking, all right, this kid probably is going to do like a pretty sweet piece of line art, right? No, this kid did something that looked like Boris Vallejo painted it, or Drew Struzan. Literally, it was like that good. It was as good as like a Drew Struzan painting. He was 11, and he was like on the level of like a Drew Struzan at 11 years old. And Jim Lee, he didn't show the viewers the piece. He was pretty like professional about it, right? He looked at the piece and he kept it. But I remember people were kind of like dogging on Jim Lee for not showing the piece, and Jim Lee was like, listen, this is a kid, and he gave the piece to me as a gift, and people were saying, oh, is it because the piece was bad? And it was actually the opposite. The piece was incredible. But there's just always goes to show you, there's always a bigger fish out there in terms of just like the ability to maybe recognize patterns or to have like an innate facility with one or more aspects of picture making. And you're always learning, you're always evolving, and that's how that's how I try to look at things now as an older, more experienced artist. When I was younger, I had a very thin skin, and I couldn't take criticism nearly as well. But it was a skill I developed, right? I used to go to conventions and get torn apart by art directors, and that's not for everybody, but it helped me develop the skill set of how to A, take critique, and B, talk about my work in a public forum. And it prepared me well for later when I got into teaching, and teaching oil painting on a professional level and teaching comics on a professional level. I worked in comics professionally for a couple of years through the Glasshouse Graphics Talent Agency. You can look me up on there. I'm still on their website. I haven't done work for them in a while since the pandemic, but I'm surprised they still have me up there. I was like, let me go see. I did my online class, and I said to my online students, I said, let's go see if I'm on there. And sure enough, my stuff was still up there. I kind of don't know how I feel about that, because I've surpassed way surpassed the stuff that they have on there at this point. But on the other hand, I was like, yeah, I guess they didn't hate me that much where they went in and deleted my profile. With Glasshouse Graphics, the way I got in with them is I pretended to be from a foreign country, and because they were an agent that specifically hired foreign artists, and I pretended to not be from the U.S. because I noticed the names in the comic books were like not anglicized. So I was like, oh, they must all have agents in these countries, and I need an agent. And so I cold called them, and I said, can I send you some samples? And they said, sure. They didn't ask where I was from either. I sent them samples, and they're like, your stuff's really good. We'll put you in our stable. And this is when I was doing sequentials. And I don't know, I was pretty slick, I feel like. They eventually found out I was stateside, and they switched me to the domestic office. It's handed up by a guy named David Campiti, I believe, runs the, and he was cool. I didn't have an issue with him. He was a cool dude. I did you know, I did some indie horror work through them. Basically, I did a lot of my stuff was on the indie side. Quite a bit of my stuff I got paid for. It never got published. I got paid for it, because of rights issues or because a writer backed out of a pitch or whatever. A lot of the times it wouldn't actually go to print. Like I did a Marcosa pitch that was greenlit, and it was actually with a screenwriter. And this guy paid me the whole time to draw the pitch, and we got greenlit by the publisher. And right before the publisher goes, "Oh, I can't pay you in advance," and of course the screenwriter, he was waiting for the guy to be like, "Oh yeah, I could pay you up front now." And when the guy said no, it kind of derailed the entire project. That happens quite a bit. But as long as I was getting paid, I was just happy to be drawing books and getting paid to do sequential art. This is in my 20s. This is a while ago now. And sequential arts I love. I love the characters. I love Marvel. I love DC. I love Spider-Man. I love all the sort of 90s stuff like Image, X-Men, Jim Lee, like all that 90s Marvel. I know like people either love it or hate it, but I loved it growing up. I was just like, this is amazing. Could not get enough of it. And then I wanted to, just for the longest time, had the sole aspiration of working for Marvel Comics. And I got close at some points. I got some portfolio reviews with some of the editors. It was a special edition New York City several, over 10 years ago at this point. But uh, what was I going to say? Interests evolved too. I always, at the same time that I liked doing comics, I always had a love for epic fantasy art, old school MTG, TSR art, particularly the work of Brahm, a lot of the old Dragonlance guys. Magic the Gathering and comics are the things that got me into art specifically. I never had a desire to just draw still lives or like, slice of life stuff. That never interested me. I was always interested in drawing things that didn't exist. In some ways, I think that was great. In other ways, I do think that can hamper your development, though, unfortunately. Like, for me, it definitely took me longer to get to a place where I felt like I could draw competently because I refused to, like, draw from life more than your average artist because I had no interest in actually drawing things that existed outside of my door for the longest time. That's changed a little bit now. I've definitely become more inspired by, like, wildlife art through paleo art specifically. It was a gateway to wildlife art in general. But for the longest time, it just bored me. And again, I do apologize if I don't answer questions. I looked up briefly and saw that one comment and thought it was an interesting observation. And yeah, I'm not actually looking at the chat. Although I'm glad no one's complaining about the ring light. I'm kind of trying to upgrade my setup a bit. And I'm just kind of fiddling around with shapes here right now. I'm not really just, I'm developing a shorthand for me to kind of more clearly understand this stuff. And I think I'm going to be cutting it. It's 4:15. I'll be cutting this around 4:20 just because I do have a class coming up that I'm teaching, like a private class. The YouTube thing, I'm trying to step up and do a little more with it, but it's tough, man. It's tough when like you're in the beginning stages in that channel and you're trying to grow the channel and it's like slow early days. It's tough to it's tough to get to frankly have the bandwidth at the end of the day, right, when you're done with your commissions, to do a segment. And to get back in the swing of things, I felt doing live streams would be a good sort of way for me to kind of get used to doing long form content again, because I've done quite a bit of a few shorts and I have an interest in doing more long form content. And then over time upgrade my production values. So I think a mic at some point will be the next order of business. And then a second camera. Again, these are all things that require time and budget, so I gotta space it out. My colleague, who's a fantastic oil painter, Bill Graff, has a YouTube, and I don't know if he's still doing a lot of YouTube, but to pandemic days he was. I think a lot of people during the pandemic kind of jumped on YouTube. That's when I jumped on it. I was like, you know what? I have nothing else to do. This is the perfect time to kind of get on YouTube, maybe do some Loomis tutorials, figure out what this is all about. And I'm gonna reference like I'm referencing. This is an actual sort of, the shape of this blade is sort of evocative of like a late Viking Age sword. At least Netflix's version of one. You know, I found some great inspiration from looking at some of the old stills of the movie, of the show Vikings. Both shows, both Valhalla and the original. I know people, like certain people, like lose their mind when you bring up Vikings Valhalla, but I actually enjoyed Vikings Valhalla. I mean, especially the later two seasons, I would say, like where they're in Constantinople, and I thought those were interesting. And the end of season 1, when Freydis fights that berserker, was kind of nuts. I don't think people liked Jarl Harkon being portrayed as, you know, I think like people had a problem with sort of the actress who they picked for that role. I'm not even going to touch that subject more than I just have. But yeah. All right, let me go in here now. I'm going to zoom in. I'll try to, like, you know, let's see, it's 6:19. We have a minute left. But yeah. Oh yeah. I see there's an AI discussion going on in the comments. Yeah, for sure. AI definitely is this is not good. I mean, irregardless of the morality of it, I think like if you're using AI to like come up with images, and I'll be honest with you, I work with a few coworkers who do use AI who are very talented, but I would tell them this if they asked me. I'm not going to offer this information to them, right? But if they asked me, hey, should I use AI to like develop my paintings? Even if they've come up with good images, I would tell them no, because I feel like as good as their images look with using AI, I feel like they would look even better if they just took the extra time to get an actual model or hire a model, right? And I know in like we don't all have that time, but there is something that gets lost. I think when you're just, it all has this 1950s Panavision, man. I'm telling you, like, I'm really good at sussing it out, and it's getting better, but I can still spot it like clear as day as a trained artist, and like it's that 1950s Panavision, like, and I'll be honest, there's a few pieces here and there that in the past, kind of escaped under my radar and creeped their way into my reference, but I'm pretty good at spotting it. But I'm not going to say that you can never use it as a tool. Like, like, let's say if you're using it in a non-for-profit way and you're using public domain art and you're using it as an educational aid, I think there's benefit to that for sure. I don't think it's the technology per se. I think it depends on the technology, though. I think that's important. Because there are certain forms of generative AI that are just, in my opinion, demon tech. But there are other applications of it depending on the source code where it can be useful. But yeah, great discussion. In any event, thank you for tuning in, everybody. I'm going to like dip out now. But thank you very much. And I'll post, I think, an update on my next live stream. I'm going to oil paint this, and I'll start with my process, how I would do an underpainting. And I actually do a pretty drilled down process so that it photographs well and photographs like, you know, as realistically as possible, where you don't get any imposter or glare. So I'll share that with you on my next live stream. That will be in 2 weeks from today. Today is Thursday. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to subscribe. Could use all the support that I can get right now, early days of the channel, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. All right, and thank you very much. I'm going to try to, I would go X out.